Hey, this is Johnny Crowder from prison, and you are watching Richard Metal Fan.
Hey, what's up, guys? Episode 204 of Richard Metal Fan Interviews, calling from Zoom, and I'm here with Johnny Crowder from the band Prison. How you doing today, Johnny?
204 episodes. Oh my word. That is
Yeah,
commitment.
yeah, I've been doing this for a little over 3 years.
That's
I'm not slowing down anytime soon.
incredible. Congratulations, man.
Well, thanks, man. It really means a lot. So, how you doing today on this fine Friday morning?
I'm pretty pumped. I had pizza for breakfast, which I couldn't recommend more. I've been working out like crazy lately, and every once in a while I will have like a fun breakfast, and today's fun breakfast was leftover pizza. So, champions breakfast for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, nothing wrong with having pizza for the breakfast. Like it should be, we should have it like every day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Dude, I feel like it's a little bit of a reminder of tour. So we've been home from tour for a while and we eat just none of the right foods on tour. I have like tons of snack foods like nuts and fruit cups and protein bars, but then we will regularly wind up having like junk food for a main meal. And there is a part of me that misses it. So every once in a while, I like tapping into that just for fun.
Hell yeah. So, kind of what I wanted to do is do talk about like your musical history and sort of like do a rundown of your discography. So, take me back to young Johnny Crowder. So, kind of growing up in Florida, what were the first bands that got you into metal and what made you want to be a vocalist?
So I loved obviously all of the radio rock stuff. So Chevelle, Breaking Benjamin, Linkin Park,
Me
System of a Down,
too.
Slipknot, Korn. These are my favorite bands to this day. I'm a big Seether fan still, so I like that whole era of rock. I listen to all those bands regularly, but the first metal bands that I listened to, I remember one of the first ones that I discovered. I, for whatever reason, went from that style of rock into like um the Partisan Turbine. I don't know if you remember them, or
I've
it's like MySpace grindcore type stuff.
I've never even heard of that band.
Yeah, I went down this like real MySpace grindcore rabbit hole and fell into a bunch of those types of bands and then into like Devourment and more slam stuff and then eventually worked my way back to like metalcore and stuff like that. But I started with really, really heavy like slam and grindcore type stuff and hardcore. Like my first show ever was Full Blown Chaos and the Warriors. So like traditional hardcore bands. And I wanted the band that made me want to be a vocalist before all of my current vocal influences. The very first band that made me want to be a vocalist was Trash Talk, which was actually my first tattoo, is the Trash Talk album cover,
Badass.
their logo. And I didn't want to sing because I wanted to be a vocalist. I wanted to write lyrics. And that so Trash Talk's earlier music made me want to be a lyricist, and then that led to me wanting to be a vocalist.
Cool, cool. It's kind of funny hearing your story, sort of getting into metal. It's kind of similar to me because when I was growing up, there was this old like radio station in Georgia called Project 961. That's how I discovered like, of course, the bands like you mentioned before, like Chevelle, Breaking Benjamin, Linkin Park, and Slipknot, System of a Down, and stuff. Of course, I cite like Linkin Park was like one of those first heavier or harder sounding bands I heard when before metal took over my life when I was 10 years old, and then I discovered before even getting into like death metal or even black metal as I got older.
Yeah, I love gateway music, and I still hope my ultimate dream for prison and for my music career is to serve as that gateway band for the next generation. Like I want to be that heavy but melodic and accessible band that people hear on the radio or in like traditional rock circles that gets them interested in metal.
Hell yeah. Yeah, and of course, a lot of people know you from prison, and of course, obviously, Dark Sermon. I'm just curious, like, what were your bands even way before that? I'd like to hear that. I don't think nobody's ever asked you that.
So those are actually technically my only two bands I've ever been in as an official member. So Dark Sermon used to be called In Reference to a Sinking Ship. That
Yeah.
was the original name. We put out an EP and then maybe like two or three singles after that before we changed our name to Dark Sermon, but it was the same band. And during that In Reference to a Sinking Ship and Dark Sermon era, like early Dark Sermon, I filled in for two bands, but I wasn't a member. So I filled in for this band called Reveal Renew that was like Southern uh hardcore, kind of like Maylene kind of stuff. Uh and then there was another band called Grenade Face, and that's literally their name. I have their one of their tour laminates up here from a tour with them, and that was more like Within the Ruins type deathcore stuff, like metalcore deathcore. And I was never actually a member in either of those bands. So my only two real bands were Dark Sermon and Prison.
Oh wow. So tell me about like starting Dark Sermon, because I know y'all formed in 2009, but of course under in a reference to a sinking ship, Monk Ear.
Yeah, I joined because I was looking to be a guitarist and nobody needed a guitarist. Everybody and their grandma plays guitar. I've been playing guitar since I was a kid. And I really planned on being a guitarist in a band, and I could not find a band that needed one. And so when I met the guys in reference, they already had a band. They had a vocalist who quit. They had played like one show together or something. Um, they hadn't put out any music. And I told them I wanted to be a guitarist, and they were like, well, we need a vocalist. And I had never tried to do vocals before, but I really wanted to. So I just started dedicating all of my time and effort into learning how to be a vocalist, because I figured it's either like I wanted to be a guitarist, and then the option was either learn to be a vocalist or don't be in a band. And I was like, okay, fine, I'll learn to be the vocalist, and then eventually I'll go back to guitar at some point. And then now I've been a vocalist in like this whole time. I've never played guitar on stage.
Yeah, cool. And so what do you remember about like those early shows with in a reference to a sinking ship before that you eventually became Dark Sermon? Do you remember like the first show you played?
I do. I was horrified. I was so stressed out. I was very afraid. I looked down the whole time. I couldn't look out at the crowd. I'm sure there's a video online somewhere of our first show. February 2009 was the first concert I ever played. And I was scared out of my mind. I was like nervous I was going to forget lyrics. I didn't like being on a stage. I just didn't know what I was getting myself into. But yeah, the whole time I was like total stage fright, like totally paralyzed. I didn't know how to talk to the audience. But one thing I do remember was thinking like, we're actually pretty good. Like the drummer was really good and the guitarists were really good and the bassist was really good. And I was like, holy crap, like I think I'm in a good band. If we really put time and effort into this, I think this could be something incredible. So even though I was afraid, I still saw that like spark of potential that we had early on.
Yeah. Yeah, and then of course you played locally around Florida, but then of course you changed your name to Dark Sermon. I'm just curious, like, why the name change and how did you come up with the name Dark Sermon? I know it's like the most cliche interview question ever.
No, so in reference to a sinking ship, nobody liked. It was named by one of the members that left right after I joined. So it was like the one member named it after a Norma Jean song because he loved Norma Jean. So he names the band and then he leaves, and then everybody is kind of stuck with this band name for a couple of years that we didn't like. It was really long and clunky and hard for people to remember. And then we were having trouble getting signed because our band name was not catchy or memorable. It was like it was something that we thought was standing in our way of growing, and our sound was changing. We went from like August Burns Red, A Plea for Purging style metalcore type stuff into more like blackened death metal, like faster stuff, more technical stuff, more ominous stuff. And we just thought the old name didn't fit anymore. So the first song on In Tongues, our 2013 record, um, that song is called The Shepherd's Staff. But originally that song was called Dark Sermon. And there's a line in that song that is part of the line is the darkest of sermons is preached. And so that we named the song Dark Sermon. And then when we were thinking about changing our band name, we made a list of all of these options that we could change it to. And then I didn't like any of them. And I was looking at our track listing for the record. I'm like, oh, shoot. Dark Sermon is a pretty cool band name and it wasn't taken. So we decided to rename the band Dark Sermon. Then we had all this old in reference to a sinking ship merch that we had to like sell or something. And then we had to rename that song and we didn't know what to call it. So the Shepherd's Staff is also taken from a line in that song.
Yeah. And I know before that, I know in 2012 you released the Aimless EP. I've actually tried to track it down. I've actually listened to some of those songs and they sound very raw sounding. Where was that recorded at?
So that Aimless was 2010, and that record we tracked with our very good friend Kenny Gill, who actually tracked the Oracle. So when we tracked the Aimless EP, it was like at his house. And then years later, I think 2014 or 2015, when we were tracking the Oracle, we tracked it at a studio that he had, but it's actually the same producer just years later. And he obviously got a lot better. But I still, listening back, I can't believe we recorded that in his bedroom. It sounds incredible, in my opinion. For if you could have seen our setup, you'd be like, wow, this sounds really good for, dude, we were 16, you know? It's shocking that it sounds as good as it is considering what we had.
Yeah. Yeah, it's still good. And then of course you eventually got signed to, I believe your y'all's first label, which was Good Fight Music. So how did they find Dark Sermon?
So we put out a music video for In Tongues when we changed our name. And that was in, I can't remember. Oh, that was in 2012. So we like did the name change and put out the In Tongues music video. And then that music video was just shared around a bunch. This was before YouTube had throttles on like making people pay for exposure or whatever. So it was really organic. Like people could just, if you had people following you on social media, all of your followers saw what you posted. Whereas now that's not the case anymore. They've changed all the algorithms. But before, we had a lot of people who followed us and had seen us on tour. So we posted our music video and it got like 10,000 views in a day, which was astonishing. Like, especially for us, especially for our age, and so many people were sharing it. It got tons and tons of shares, and somebody had shared it with an entertainment lawyer who then shared it with a bunch of label people, and then they got in touch with us. So we actually talked to a number of labels, and it took us a while to decide on E1.
Nice. Nice. And then tell me about like making In Tongues the debut album, because I when I first heard this album, the way I would describe it like musically, it sounds like Behemoth like covering Black Dahlia Murder, or it just sounds like really dark and heavy.
Yeah, those were big influences of ours. What was really interesting for us is we were used to having so much creative control because we had done everything ourselves. And then that was our first record tracking with like a big studio. So we tracked at Audio Hammer, which did like Whitechapel and Job for a Cowboy and all these big bands. So when we were in there, you got to keep in mind, we're teenagers. So we're like, here's what we want it to be like. And then we'd have an engineer go like, ugh, you guys don't know enough about songwriting. So he was like, actually, it was our first time working with somebody who had so much more experience than us, helping us write songs that were, I mean, he would have us take out like a whole minute and a half of a song because he's like, this is just not accomplishing what you're trying to accomplish. So I think we were frustrated at the time that the record was turning out differently than we anticipated. But now looking back, I'm actually really proud of how it turned out.
Yeah, and hard to believe this year does mark 10 years of that album. So do you feel differently about the album now as opposed to when you first put it out?
Totally. I really feel like it's aged well. I don't listen to a lot of fast metal stuff anymore. I do every once in a while. Like I listened to Cattle Decapitation this week. So
They're fucking sick.
it's not like I never listen to fast stuff, but I before it was like all I would listen to. And now I very infrequently listen to fast metal stuff. And when I put on old Dark Sermon, it feels old enough to where I don't feel like I wrote it. Like it's so long ago. I don't even I don't I feel like somebody else wrote that music. And when I listen to it, I feel like it's actually some of the catchiest fast metal music that I know of. So I really credit my band members with writing riffs and parts that were so memorable. Like, I obviously wrote all the lyrics, but I didn't write that much of the actual music. Like maybe a fifth of the actual music I contributed to. So looking back, I think it's great. And it's in large part because we had such talented songwriters in the band.
And yeah, and then when you first put it out, you started like touring outside of Florida for the first time, or was it still just local?
So we had been touring outside of Florida for years at that point. Um, but when we put out that record was we obviously had to tour on it like immediately. So I'm looking back at our laminates. Our first tour after that record came out, I think was Chimera.
Wow.
Yeah, but we had already done a number of US tours before that.
Nice. Nice. Did you like play like Georgia around that time? Because I know I think you might played Masquerade. I saw you play at Masquerade twice.
Yeah, we've played Masquerade a number of times. I would imagine that that Chimera tour played Georgia because it was a full US.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I'm going into the next album, The Oracle. I thought that was a great follow-up to In Tongues because usually with the debut album you have your entire life to write, and there's a lot of hype with the first album. When it came to making The Oracle, did you felt pressure to follow up In Tongues?
I think it was the opposite. I felt a lot of pressure for In Tongues because it was our first release on a label. We were nervous. Like, dude, we signed a one album deal. So they could have dropped us. Like E1 could have just been like, all right, screw it. We didn't like the first record. Goodbye. And they let us do a second record with them. And that to me, I felt so much more record, or I felt so much more pressure to put out the first one that the second one, the writing felt way more organic and natural because I felt less of the pressure. And I think that's part of the reason why I like the Oracle so much, is because I know it sounds very different, but it also sounds a lot more natural and flowing compared to In Tongues, which is kind of like has real brick wall transitions and very like a fast, rigid structure.
Yeah, and I remember the first time I think I seen Dark Sermon was on that album cycle. I think the first time I saw you all was you did that tour with that cattle decapitation. Sure, and that
Mm.
was like at the old Masquerade 2015. That was like a fun show. I remember like I somehow like got up on stage and tried to like crowd surf, but I think somebody didn't catch me. I remember I like smacked my head back of my head on like the concrete real hard.
I'm glad you survived that. That
Yeah,
sounds brutal.
yeah, I'm glad I didn't like get a concussion or died. And I remember my friend Ryan was giving me shit saying like, dude, you didn't almost die. I'm like, fuck you, dude. I thought I was gonna die.
I'm glad you are still alive for sure.
Absolutely. And then I think the last time I ever saw Dark Sermon, you came back in 2016. You did a tour, that tour at the Rivers of Nile. And I remember my buddy's band actually opened up that Atlanta show, which was awesome.
Yeah, Rivers, they were one of the bands that we toured with that I think we got along with the best. Like we had they're not only are they very talented, obviously, but we really hung out a lot. Like we really got along with those guys. And even when they every time they come through, I go see them. Like when they were through with Between the Buried and Me just a couple months ago, I went and got to catch up with everybody. And it I think when I look back at that tour in particular, I think that was like one of the best interpersonal dynamics we've had on a tour was with those guys. They're really easy to tour with.
Yeah. And then you played for a little bit, and then of course Dark Sermon broke up. So how hard was it to sort of like end Dark Sermon?
Dude, I cried and cried and cried. I was so bummed. I fought like I really didn't want Dark Sermon to break up. I was fighting for us to continue because we a lot of people don't know this. We had tours booked. We were supposed to continue touring. And some of the members of the band actually like canceled the tours without checking with everybody. So they like made the decision not to do the tours and they're like, we want to stay home and write. And then we stayed home and nobody was writing anything. I would send in riffs and nobody would respond to me. So it was like months and months of really trying to make it work. And we had a member quit, and then we had another member quit, and then there was just three of us. And I told the guys like, I really want to do this, and the other two guys were like, I mean, we already fulfilled our contract with the record label, and like we just want to chill at home, and we don't really want to do it anymore. And I was heartbroken. So people think that I created Prison and then Dark Sermon broke up because I chose to pursue Prison, but it's not. That's not how it happened. I only pursued Prison because I couldn't keep Dark Sermon from breaking up.
Yeah. And so how did you start Prison? Because I know you all formed 2017.
So we actually started putting out music in 2014,
Oh
and it
wow.
was a side project. It was just going to be on the internet. We were never going to play any shows. We never had any of our bandmates listed online because we were all in other bands that were signed to record labels, so we couldn't, we weren't supposed to be doing another band. So we started putting out music online totally anonymously, and it was just a fun side project, a cool outlet for us to write different styles of music that we couldn't write in our own bands. And then when our other bands were breaking up, like at that time, the members of Prison were in other bands, and those bands were also breaking up. So we all kind of looked at each other and we're like, shoot, all of our main bands broke up. Do you want to make this side project into a real band? So we thought we'd give it a shot. So in 2017, we put out our first full EP that was properly distributed, but we had a whole EP that's like a lot of people don't know about, called the Hurt EP. And this is early, like 2014, 15, 16, and early 2017, where we were putting out singles regularly. And some people might have some on YouTube somewhere, but there are some deep cut Prison songs that you cannot find on Spotify today that we put out before, when it was just a side project.
Yeah. And would we ever like release those songs like officially, or will they ever see like the light of day?
I really want to. I think they're awesome. My guitarist doesn't really want to. So if you really want to hear the old stuff, just spam all of our social media and all of his social media and like pressure him to release it, because I really want to. I think there's some great stuff in there.
Yeah, but tell me about like the first like EP NGRI. I think that's like a great like introduction to you all. So tell me about like making that EP.
That was Prison is weird because we've been writing. So Cooper and I, the guitarist Austin Coop and I, write everything together, and we don't sit down and write a record. We write continuously. We never stop writing. So we have like dozens of songs that we've just been. I would go over to his house every couple of weeks and we'd just do a writing session for years, years and years. So we have tons of music that then when it comes time to put out a release, we're kind of stumped. We're like, well, wait, which songs do we choose to put on this release? Which ones flow well together? So with NGRI, we had tons of songs that we had written at that time that we didn't put on that EP. So we had to really choose, like, instead of trying to sit down and cram to write a record, we actually had way more songs than we could put on the record. So the real challenge was figuring out what we wanted to include in the record and what we wanted to save for another release and what we wanted to not release at all.
Yeah, I think it was like a good EP. And so tell me about like around that. Did you start like playing like your debut shows with Prison? So tell me about like that.
So deep cuts, some people don't know, we actually played a few secret shows before the EP. This was before we had members listed and all that stuff. So it was like pretty top secret. Like there might have been a Facebook event that said like special guest or something, but we couldn't really publicize that we were doing it. But we played a handful of shows in 2014, 15, 16 that were all really top secret, Florida shows only. They were tons of fun, but they weren't really official like debut shows for the band. In 2017, when we released NGRI, we did a couple shows locally. We did like a little CD release headlining run in Florida. And then our first tour on that album cycle, by the grace of God, was Suicide Silence, which
Yeah.
was like at the time the biggest tour I had ever done in my entire life. So that was like winning the lottery.
Yeah. I remember I almost was gonna go to that show, but then I remember it was at Atlanta. It was like right around the time where like, there was like a huge like snowstorm, and I was kind of scared because I didn't really feel like thought I was safe like driving on like the icy roads, and I'm still kicking myself for missing that.
Dude, well, first of all, safety first, always. But second of all, that still to this day might be the greatest tour I've ever done. It was unbelievable. Like it's still a dream looking back.
No. Yeah. I still that had to be like the biggest show, playing with like I guess one of the pioneering bands of the deathcore genre.
Dude, and people don't remember that lineup was Suicide Silence, Winds of Plague, Upon a Burning Body, and Slaughter to Prevail, and us. It was
Wow.
absolutely stacked.
Yeah, because
Like
I remember Slaughter Veil didn't even make it, I think, because I think they had visa issues.
That's right. Yeah, when we showed up on the first day, which is funny because we wound up touring with Slaughter to Prevail anyway in 2019. So just a couple years later, we actually wound up touring with them anyway. But we were joking on the way to the first day of that tour, what if they don't show up again?
Yeah.
Because if they didn't show up for the Suicide Silence dates, it's okay because they're still a tour package. But if they didn't show up to their own headliner, we'd have to just drive home and call it quits.
Yeah. Yeah, but that show, but that tour was had to be great because I watched you on the Garza podcast, and that's still one of my favorite go-to podcasts to watch because he definitely knows his shit.
Yeah, he's awesome. He honestly, we have so much, we owe so much to Suicide Silence for taking us on that tour. Like they could have absolutely chosen a bigger band or a band that they were better friends with, done a favor for somebody, but they picked us, and I still look at that as like it's incredible that big bands like that would be willing to give such a young band so early in their career. Like Prison only had an EP out. Like they really gave us a chance.
Yeah, and how was like the crowd reaction for that tour? Were fans like, "Fuck yeah, this is awesome"?
Dude, that's what really blew us away was people were showing up knowing all our lyrics. Like every single word to every single song we played from day one. It was like these people had never seen us before, and we're playing it because we're opening. So we're playing at like 7 o'clock sharp, and everybody's jumping on top of each other singing our lyrics. It was like we had no idea we would be received that way.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really great to see how the growth from Prison from where you started to now, you definitely have increased tenfold.
I feel really grateful. Like a lot of us thought that our old bands were our only shots at doing this. And getting another chance with Prison has just been so redeeming for all of us.
Yeah. And then tell me about making the first full-length Prison album, Still Alive. I think that's a great debut album, or full-length, I should say. So what was the thought process going into making the debut full-length Prison album?
So we really wanted to, there's a picture on our social media somewhere of how Cooper and I tracked that record where we really wanted the recorded experience to match the live experience. So anyone who's seen us live knows that we're a live band. It's like it's just an energy thing. Like if you are in the room when Prison plays, you feel it. It feels there's an atmosphere shift when we're on stage. And it's some type of magic. I don't know if it's the members or the music or what or the audience or whatever, but every time we take the stage it just feels different, and we wanted to recreate that magic that people feel in a live setting on a record, which is really challenging. So there's a lot of parts to the Still Live record where if you listen to it, you can hear things that aren't perfect exactly. And we did it that way on purpose. So this is just one example. When I tracked vocals, I would track the entire song all the way through 3 times in one take. And then Cooper would chop and screw the best takes and we would call it. So a lot of times for vocal tracking, you do a couple lines, then you go back and redo the lines until they're perfect, and it takes a long time. But because we wanted certain lines to sound like my voice was cracking or I was out of breath, we would just track the song 3 times in a row, and then that's it. I couldn't go back and fix stuff. So it made it very organic and raw.
Yeah. Yeah, and I still think it's a great album. I also love like the album cover, which is just basically looks like a discharge kind of sheet. So how did the idea of that come to be to make it the cover?
So we had hired an artist to do artwork that didn't turn the artwork in time. And I was so frustrated. We had a concept and we expected someone to do it and they didn't. And then I had a backup idea. I had a lot of other ideas, but I had this backup idea where I would actually write out discharge paperwork from a hospital and then I mean type it up in a document on a blank Word document, print it out, and then write the lyrics in by hand on the discharge forms. And I thought it was going to take a little bit of time. The guys were open to it. It took, I'm not joking when I say I spent 12 hours
Holy
on that.
shit.
believe how long it took. It probably took longer to like actually type everything out, write it, format it correctly. But I'm so happy with how it turned out. Anybody who has the booklet or the actual CD itself knows how special it is on the inside and how it feels like you're really a part of prison holding it.
Yeah. Yeah, I still think it's a great album. And then you toured for a little bit, and then of course that certain virus that I refused to name happened. And then I know during that time you did a little like live EP live in Texas. So where the idea to come to be to sort of like release sort of like a live sort of album?
So we weren't going to. We had toured with I think Oceano through Texas, and the guy who was running sound recorded all of the audio, like raw audio, and he was like, "Give me your email, I'll send it to you." And we are like, "We don't even know if we're ever going to use this for anything." And then during COVID, we thought all of these people can't go to shows. So how can we give them a little taste of the live concert experience that they're missing by being home? So we dug back through our emails and found those files. And then Cooper, our guitarist, who is actually a professional producer and engineer, he mixed and mastered those files of raw audio into the live EP.
Yeah, I think that that song just based that release definitely hones in sort of like y'all's sort of like live sound. So how sort of like so there's not like any similarities or differences to like playing live as opposed to like recording? Because I definitely feel like you're just as tight live as you are on the records.
I appreciate that, but they're definitely different, dude. Like, I'm the type of person who we're not perfect live. Like, I'd rather jump into the crowd and miss three straight lines of lyrics because I'm climbing on top of people, or like jumping in the circle pit and running around with everybody. Like, my goal is not for the live concert to be exactly like the record. My goal is for the live concert to be so incredible, such a memorable experience, the best concert you've ever been to, that when you go back and listen to the records, you think, oh man, I can't wait until they come back. Like I really want the live show to feel more special and different than the record, which isn't to say that we don't try to make the records feel special, but it's that each time we play, we want to top what people expect from what they heard online.
I mean, totally. Like, and then of course the most recent release you did the Energy EP, which of course I know you released like songs like a couple years prior leading up to that, and now you just compiled it into one recently. So is that sort of like something to hold fans over to wait to like the next full length Prison album, or is this just sort of like a one off kind of like thing?
Dude, we have so much new music. I don't even know what to do with it. We're like really having trouble timing. Like, do we put out multiple EPs? Do we put out one giant LP? Do we put out multiple LPs? How do we time the releases? Like I said, because we don't write the same way as other bands, we don't have the same problems that other bands do. We just have different ones. And our problem is like now we have a giant pile of music and we don't know when or how to strategically release it. But I do know for a fact that we'll be releasing new music next year because we have too much music not to. So
Yeah.
this was the way to compile some of our more recent music and put out new music and package it all together in a way that's like, hey, at least you have a release. So now you have NGRI, you have Live in Texas, you have Still Alive, and now you have Energy. So you have four different releases that you can play with right now while we figure out how the heck we want to share the rest of this music with you.
Yeah. So how many songs have you all like wrote?
I literally don't even know.
Yeah. I feel like you could
I
release a big like 10 albums with those songs.
I mean, if you think about the way that like big bands wrote records, Linkin Park would go in and write 40 songs and put
Yeah.
11 on a record. Like that's how really good artists get good at songwriting is they just write hit after hit after hit. And then they look at a 40 song list and they only pick the top 10. So you get a record that is just extraordinary because it's the best of the best of the best that they could write. And that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, yeah, that has to be like exhausting, like writing so many songs. Like, does it ever get to a point of saying, okay, hey, we've written enough?
Yes, but then like a week later, I'll come up with a riff and send it to Cooper. He'll come up with something, and then we're like, oh dang, we need to get back in the studio. So I love writing music so much. I used to want to be a songwriter for work. Like I wanted to move to Nashville and write music for other artists, like work for a publisher. And it's one of my favorite parts of being in a band. So there are periods where I'll go like a month or two or three where I just have no ideas. And so I don't try to write. And then there are other periods where I'll go a month or 2 or 3 months where I can't stop. Like ideas just pour out of my head. So it ebbs and flows.
Man, you all are like literally on fire.
Dude, it's so fun. I love being in a band with Austin Coop.
Yeah,
That's for we have such great chemistry. I've told him before, like, I wouldn't continue doing prison without him.
yeah.
We are
Because
50
he
50.
just comes up with some really sick riffs.
Yeah, in fact, each time I write a riff and send it to him, he writes the next part that contextualizes the first riff and vice versa. Like, without this is gonna sound corny, but think about peanut butter and jelly. Like, can
Yeah,
you have jelly and a cracker? Yeah, it's probably fine, but it's so much better when you have peanut butter and jelly together. So I know that he could write music on his own, that I could write music on my own, and it would probably be good. But together, we just make music that I'm like, this is not twice as good as what I could write on my own. It's 10 times as good.
right. It's kind of like assuming talking about songwriting. One thing I love is like the lyrics, because being a vocalist, do you try to like put yourself in like a certain mind frame to come up with lyrics, or just the lyrics just come like naturally and organically?
Before in Dark Sermon, I was so weirdly committed to being intense about lyric writing. I was like, yeah, it's got to be like dark and brutal, and I had to be in this really like moody atmosphere to write. And now the way that I write lyrics is more like discovery. So I will listen to an instrumental of a track. Like, let's say I go to Cooper's, we write an instrumental. And then for the next few weeks, I listen to it on repeat 100 times, maybe. And I don't even try to write anything. I'm just listening and trying to understand, like, what is the song trying to say? What is the song feel like? How is it trying to express itself? Is there something it's trying to communicate, some type of message? And then all I do is just try to uncover what the song is trying to communicate rather than me trying to write lyrics. I'm trying to hear the lyrics, if that makes sense.
Totally. Like, and I got a couple more questions for you, if that's okay. Okay, sort of like coming from Florida, like Florida, like I feel like has a very diverse metal scene. Like, of course, people know it from like the old school death metal bands like Cannibal Corpse, Morbid Angel, Deicide, but then also like A Day to Remember, and then Trivium. So, how diverse of a metal scene was there down in Florida, or was it the goal for, I guess, for Darkstorm and of course now Prison to get outside of the state and play in front of like different cities and places and stuff?
Growing up, we had an extraordinary local scene. It, dude, there was something special in like the late 2000s, early 2010s. Local shows would sell out, local shows of the same bands that played at that venue last weekend. And they would sell the heck out. Everybody's wearing the band's merch. Everyone's like studying the band's lyrics on MySpace during the week. And one bill could have like a deathcore band, a grindcore band, like Seeny Weeny Hot Topic, like metalcore band, and then like a southern hardcore band, and then like an emo band, and all the bands would get all the love. It was just, maybe this is like rose colored glasses and it wasn't this way, but if you look back at videos, you're like, wow, this was a really cool, unique, diverse scene where it didn't seem like there was nearly as much politics or like what band shirt are you wearing or you can't support this band or that band. There was so much more openness, and there was a lot more like mixed genre concerts. And I look back and think, I'm glad that I came up in an environment like that, because kids who are going to shows, let's say 2016 on, are experiencing a different version of that I perceive to be a little less open. But something that Prison tries to do is usher in that openness and invite people who aren't cool or don't have all the right band shirts or whatever, just regular people who are curious about heavy music. We care a lot about that inclusive atmosphere.
Cool. And then the final question I want to ask you is kind of like I want to talk about like band recommendations. So, and I also got some for you. So, what are some like bands or artists that you're currently listening to right now? Now that a lot of people probably not have heard of before that people should check out.
That's such a good question. I don't know. So I'm going to check my recently played on Spotify because that will be revealing.
Yeah, I got the same thing too.
There's this old band called Bermuda that I used to love that I was listening to yesterday.
Yeah.
I really liked them. I also liked the new Three Teeth album called Index.
Yeah, I've seen them live last a couple years ago with Cradle of Filth, and they're pretty good, really industrial sounding.
I'm just reading you things that are on my recents. This album called Ego Trip by the band Drowning from Chicago, like beatdown stuff. This old hardcore punk band Outbreak that I used to absolutely love. If anyone remembers 2x4 or Deity, they were like real heavy core bands that are not around anymore, but I was just listening to them this week. The Angel Dust record, Rock the F On Forever. I've been jamming that lately. Humanity's Last Breath, for sure.
Oh,
And then one thing that's really caught me by surprise, actually, two records that have caught me by surprise. One is the record Fanfare by Dorian Electra, and that's more poppy stuff. I traditionally do not listen to that genre, but I really like that record. And the other one is one that's taken me by surprise is an album by a band called Super Love called Follow Noise. And that's like poppy metal. I don't know. Both of those I didn't expect to like, and I actually like quite a bit.
nice. And for me, I got some for you. A few I've just discovered. Probably yeah, the band called Cobra Spell. They're sort of like just straight up like they're kind of all female band. They're from Europe. I believe they're from one of their guitarists is actually from the Netherlands, but they have like some other members. I believe that one of their guitarists is from Brazil, and then the other members there are from Spain. They kind of sound like just like straight up like 80s heavy metal, kind of like Wasp or like Iron Maiden, Judas Priest. They're really catchy stuff. And then there's another band called Conquer Divide. I actually know their drummer. I've actually interviewed her twice.
Yeah.
She's another good friend of mine. They're killing it right now. And I think they deserve more. And I know they recently got a Patreon, which I think is great. And then there's another band I called Dead by April. They're all the way from Sweden. I describe them. They kind of have like metalcore a little bit, but also have a lot of like electronic-y kind of stuff and kind of pop stuff. And a lot of people describe them as like the Swedish metal Backstreet Boys. And they're pretty much one of my favorite bands. I feel like I'm one of the few Americans that knows who they are, but I know their Spotify says that they're one of their biggest like numbers is of like listeners is like in America, and they're actually doing a little run next year, and I'm planning on like going up to like one of those dates to see them. So I feel like
Very,
those are some bands you should check out.
very cool. I just saved them. I'll check it out.
Awesome. So thank you, Johnny, for taking the time to chat with today. It is great to be able to talk with you. Is just anything else you would like to plug in terms of like tours or anything if you're allowed to say?
Um, so please, for the love of all that is holy, listen to the new EP by Prison called Energy. I think you will love it. I think it sounds nothing like you think it will sound, and I'm very proud of it. Also, if you're a music video person, we put a lot of work into a music video for a song called Out of My Head. That song is on the Energy EP. Please check it out. I think it turned out so amazing. So that's my big call to action is go listen to the Energy EP. It literally just came out. Energy just came out, and go watch the music video for Out of My Head. And then
Awesome.
we'll announce the tour dates next year, or
Awesome.
maybe sooner. I don't know.
Yeah. Awesome. So everybody, Johnny Crowder from Prison. We'll see you next time.